Trapper is the face of DBD, but when it comes to his viability, it's kind of all around the place. Now, you might be wondering what I mean by that, and when it comes to top level and high MR, the tier list that you always see, it's a general consensus. He's at the very bottom. But I'm not here to say the sad state of Trapper is just because he isn't very good at high MMR. No, I want to talk also about the lower MMR levels and kind of why they aren't as optimal and, what counterplay they're missing out on. Now, when we look at this gameplay in a bubble when it comes to Trapper, it seems that Trapper in high MMR is very often left with no traps on him and constant disabling of his traps. Whereas lower MMR has a bit of leeway when it comes to grabbing traps and setting up your web, and then usually you watch people nonchalantly vault a window or run a pallet that's trapped. So, why is it that lower MMR doesn't usually think to avoid these traps or disable them when not in chase? Is it because they're bad? Is it because they don't play many trappers? Or is it just because, there's like a fundamental thing they're missing? Let's talk about it. Alright, looking at average to above average MMR, which is what I would say my trapper is personally in. I just don't play him that often. So I think he's just really sitting around where the MMR starts. His viability changes a lot right at that area. I would go as far to say, just doing simple pallet and window placements, just shutting off windows and pallets, they usually don't have the coordination to disable it, so you would honestly put Trapper in the higher tiers, like Hillbilly and, other killers that have pretty strong powers, but difficult uses. And actually, according to the MMR kill rates, he is above 5 killers, including Hillbilly, at a 56% kill rate. Now, this is below the average, of course, but still, he shows that he still has potential above these killers because he's a lot more simple to pick up, and he can definitely easily get downs on windows and pallet placements. It's also important to state that in this level of MMR, survivors tend to be a lot more afraid of the killer. They will walk away or hide whenever the terror radius gets too close to them, and this kind of creates a passive pressure, meaning that, not as many gens would pop while you're doing your setup. And this fear doesn't just apply to hiding when you get close, of course. I think it's a big reason why survivors will just vault into your traps. It's because I think they're a lot more worried about taking an M1 hit and don't really think about how they could just be running right into a trap. That's the counterplay that this level misses, where they could just take a hit and get that distance, but they're more scared of taking that hit and getting down soon after than vaulting right into a trap and then it all being over instantly. That's it. They don't think about the comparison there and how it's honestly worse for them if they just vault that window. Okay, now I want to talk about Trapper himself. I want to speak about how he functions and how he can be improved. I think he's a very basic idea for a killer, and his traps and generally his pressure along with it are pretty easy to remove. You just hold a button on them and then boom, it's gone. Like there's no downside. I mean, it just takes you a couple seconds, and he has to walk all the way over there to re-enable it without an iridescent add-on. So I think another comparison you can make is Hag. Hag needs to have a survivor to have a flashlight to disable her traps or just set them off. And that puts a survivor in a pretty weird state because not every survivor is going to have a flashlight, or any survivor is going to have a flashlight, and putting yourself on a trap and setting it off is a risk. It's a risk that you have to take to try and remove her pressure. And of course, another thing about pressure with Hag is that she can just instantly teleport to the trap. Trapper has to just waddle his way over there, praying that the survivor is unlucky enough to just not get out of the trap. So I think that that's a big issue. But I wouldn't say that Trapper doesn't have a skill ceiling. Trapper, just like any other killer, definitely has a skill ceiling. And, his trap placements can definitely improve with playtime and become a lot stronger and a lot harder to deal with. But even though, your trap placements are improving and you're improving, he's one of the killers where as you get better with him, and get better results, you actually start to have to fight for every kill and fight for just the general win of a match a lot harder. And it becomes just to this point where it's asking a lot, and you start at such a disadvantage where you kind of rely on either in-game perks, um, and just like bringing it back during gates being powered, or you rely on basement trapper, which is not something that everyone wants to do, but it does get results, and it's generally not that fun. It's not something that you should have to rely on for a killer because I mean, if you just play game to game with basement trapper, it's not going to be that fun. But I think that really speaks with the problem at the core of trapper. He's someone who is strong but not overpowered in the low levels, but then a absolute joke in the higher levels of MMR. And I don't think Trapper could be fixed with just more traps, like everyone's suggesting, or grabbing traps from lockers. I think it would help with his viability. Like, it would, remove his reliance on add ons, but it doesn't really fix the fundamental issue that no matter how good you are, and how good your trap placements are, the counterplay for survivors is just very simple. And if they're coordinated, it's even more simple, and it just ends up with you not really having a power the whole game. And a little side note, his iridescent add-on, the Bloody Coil, is actually a really good fix, I think, to that issue. And it puts a lot more pressure on survivors for disabling traps as they, lose a health state. And I think that's a bit more of a risk that they have to take instead of just, hold the button, it's gone, no risk. So I think, honestly, the Bloody Coil should be made base kit, and that any survivor that wants to disable a trap has to think about whether they want to lose that health state, whether it's worth it, or if they're injured, they can just go around disabling traps. But they specifically have to be the one to take the time, not like how it is now, where all four survivors can just go around disabling traps separately, and it basically takes down his web way faster than he can redeploy it. All right, and I mean, if we're talking about very low MMR, and I don't really have to mention it, but Trapper is up there. He's up there with one of the best, such as Bubba and Ghostface. Um, yeah, it's a completely different game out there, and it's usually just people who can one shot usually have a strong advantage in the very low MMR. Maybe I'll make a tier list about very low MMR. I think it'll be an interesting video to make. Um, but yeah, he's definitely super strong in those low levels, and you don't really have to imagine that he would be. All in all, Trapper is in a pretty awkward spot. He starts off really strong and then goes nowhere but down the higher you go in MMR. And while I would love to say like they do for other killers that he could get a rework, doing a rework would be very difficult for someone like the Trapper, because how do you rework Trapper without, removing the fact that he is the Trapper and fundamentally changing why he exists? But I think the answer is complicated, and behavior is probably just as qualified than everyone else who makes concepts and ideas, to fix him. I think whatever they decide for Trapper, because I think they definitely will give another look at Trapper, because even after giving him 2 traps base kit, it helped him, but it definitely didn't change where he is in the tier list for a lot of people. That one trap does not make so much difference that he jumps the tier list. But at least he has good perks. At least he has good teachables. His teachables are actually pretty solid. All right, I'll see you on the next video, and I'll probably be starting a series of randomized killer builds. See ya.